The alarm clock rang at 4:47 a.m., but Roberto had been awake for 2 hours. Sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, he watched his hands tremble as he held the paper that would change everything or destroy everything. Mr. Roberto Mendes, we hereby inform you that your proposal has been accepted to assume the regional directorship of a national supply company. At 43 years old, after 20 years working as an accountant in a small town in the interior of Goiás, Roberto had received the opportunity of his dreams. Regional director of CONAB. Salary 4 times higher. Company car. Premium health plan for the whole family. The problem? He would have to move to Brasília in 2 weeks. Leave the city where he was born, where everyone knew him as Beto from the gas station, a reference to the small gas station his father had left as inheritance and which he managed in his spare time. Leave the little church of 80 members where he had been a deacon for 15 years. Leave the simple and predictable life to dive into a corporate world he didn't know. "Honey, we didn't sleep again?" whispered Claudia, his wife, approaching in the morning. She already knew the answer, but asked anyway, as she had been doing for 3 weeks since the letter arrived. "Claudia, I don't know if I can do it," said Roberto, his voice choked. "Brasília is another world. People who studied at universities whose names I can't even pronounce. What if I can't handle it? What if I'm a failure? We'll lose everything. The house, friends, tranquility." Claudia sat beside him and held his hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Do you remember when you were 23 and decided to run for deacon at church? You trembled like this too." Roberto smiled for the first time in weeks. He remembered perfectly. Back then, public speaking was his greatest terror. The idea of preaching a sermon or leading a prayer left him in panic. But Pastor Alcides had insisted, "Roberto, God doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. But this is different, Claudia. Here everyone knows me. There'll be nobody. A hillbilly lost among sharks." That's when Claudia did something she hadn't done in years. She got up, took the Bible from the nightstand, and opened to a page she seemed to know by heart. "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Her voice echoed in the silent room. Joshua 1 verse 9. Do you know when God said this? Roberto shook his head. When Joshua was terrified. Moses had died, and he would have to lead 2 million people to conquer a land full of giants. 2 million, Roberto! And you're afraid of leading a team of 200 employees? Roberto looked at his wife. In 18 years of marriage, he had never seen her so determined. But still, the fear was real, pulsing, almost physical. "What if God is wrong this time?" he asked, immediately regretting the question. Roberto Mendes was not a man of big dreams. Son of Mr. Antonio, owner of the town's only gas station, he had grown up with a simple philosophy. Work honestly, don't get into trouble, and God takes care of the rest. This philosophy had worked perfectly for 4 decades. He graduated in accounting from the Regional State University, married Claudia in the same church where they were baptized, had 2 children, Marina, 16, and Joao Pedro, 12. Simple life, but solid. Predictable, but happy. The problem started 6 months ago, when the City Hall hired his accounting firm to organize municipal finances. Roberto discovered a capacity he didn't even know he had, seeing patterns where others saw only numbers. In 3 months, he had completely reorganized the city's budget, found 2.3 million Brazilian reals in misallocated resources, and created a management system that became a reference in the region. That's when everything changed. Dr. Marcelo, the state's agriculture secretary, came to town for an official visit and asked to meet the accountant who worked miracles with Sao Pedro do Araguaya's finances. 2 weeks later, Roberto received an invitation to give a lecture in Goiânia about public management. A month later, another invitation, this time in Brasília. "Mr. Mendes," said Dr. Marcelo after the lecture, "have you ever thought about working with us in Brasília? CONAB needs someone with your profile, someone who understands both numbers and people." Roberto had laughed. "Doctor, I'm just a small-town accountant. Brasília isn't for me." "Mr. Mendes, may I ask a personal question? Do you believe in God?" "Of course. I've been a Christian since childhood." Then allow me to suggest something. Maybe God is opening a door you didn't even know existed. 3 weeks later, the formal proposal arrived, and with it, the terror. Roberto wasn't a man of changes. His biggest adventure until then had been a honeymoon trip to Caldas Novas, 2 hours from home. The idea of living in the federal capital, working with politicians and executives, dealing with budgets of billions of reais, all of this paralyzed him. But there was something deeper. Roberto was beginning to realize that the fear wasn't just about the new job. It was about what he might become. What if success changed who he was? What if the big city corrupted his simplicity? What if, in the end, he discovered he was just a small fish trying to swim in an ocean? "Dad, are you going to accept?" asked Marina during dinner that Thursday. The question had been hanging in the air for weeks, but no one had had the courage to ask it directly. Roberto looked around the table. Claudia, who had left her teaching job to take care of the family. Marina, who was in her second year of high school and dreamed of studying medicine. João Pedro, who barely understood what was happening, but sensed the tension. "I don't know, daughter. It's a difficult decision." "Difficult how?" Marina insisted. At 16, she had inherited her mother's determination and her grandfather's stubbornness. "Dad, you always told me that when God opens a door, we should have the courage to walk through it." "But what if it's not God, Marina? What if it's just my vanity? What if I'm confusing opportunity with trap?" João Pedro, who had been quiet until then, raised his head from his plate. "Dad, do you remember when you taught me to ride a bicycle?" Roberto smiled. How could he forget? João Pedro had spent weeks terrified at the idea of removing the training wheels. "You told me I had to trust that you wouldn't let me fall, that even if I fell, you'd be there to pick me up." The table fell silent. "Dad, if God is bigger than you, why don't you trust that he won't let you fall?" Roberto felt something stir in his chest. Wisdom coming from a child's mouth, he thought, remembering the expression Pastor Alcides always used. That night, after everyone went to sleep, Roberto walked to the gas station. It was a ritual he had maintained since his father's death 5 years ago. Whenever he needed to think, he went there, sat in the same chair where Mr. Antonio spent afternoons, and talked to God. "Dad, I don't know if you can hear me from where you are, but I need advice," he said aloud, looking at the stars. "Your whole life, you taught me not to be afraid of honest work. But this job, it's bigger than anything I ever imagined doing." The wind swayed the trees around the station, and Roberto remembered a conversation they had years ago. "Son," Mr. Antonio had said, "courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is being afraid and doing it anyway because you know you're not alone." "But Dad, how do I know I'm not alone?" That's when Roberto remembered something he had forgotten long ago. He was 12 when it happened. Mr. Antonio had decided to expand the station, build a convenience store. Everyone in town said it was crazy, that he would go bankrupt, that a small station couldn't compete with big chains. "Dad, aren't you afraid?" Young Roberto had asked at the time. "I am, son. Very afraid. But you know what I learned? When you're afraid to do the right thing, it's usually because the right thing is too big for you to do alone. That's when you know you need God. And how do you know if it's the right thing? You pray, ask for wisdom, and then pay attention to the signs he gives." Roberto smiled in the darkness. The signs, maybe they had always been there. The invitation to the first lecture had arrived on the same day. He was praying, asking for a way to help Marina pay for college. The CONAB proposal had arrived the same week Claudia commented that she wanted to go back to studying, get a graduate degree. And yesterday, João Pedro had come home from school excited. "Dad, did you know that Brasília has the best robotics courses in Brazil?" Coincidences? Or signs? The answer came in a way Roberto never expected. On Friday morning, a week before the final deadline to accept the proposal, Roberto was organizing municipal accounting documents when his cell phone rang. It was Dr. Marcelo from Brasília. "Mr. Roberto, good morning. Sorry to bother you, but we need to talk urgently." Roberto's heart raced. Had they changed their minds? Discovered he wasn't qualified enough? "Of course, doctor. What happened?" "Mr. Roberto, last night we had an emergency meeting here at CONAB. We discovered a corruption scheme that diverted more than 50 million Brazilian reals destined for for family agriculture programs. It's a scandal that could destroy the institution's credibility. Roberto felt the world spin. Corruption? Scandal? He'd spent his whole life away from this type of problem. Doctor, I don't know if I'm the right person to deal with this kind of situation. Mr. Roberto, that's exactly why we need you. I need someone I can trust completely. Someone with impeccable integrity. Someone who doesn't have system vices. Roberto remained silent, processing the information. Doctor, can I be honest with you? Of course. I'm very afraid. Afraid I can't handle it. Afraid of disappointing. Afraid of discovering I'm not who you think I am. Dr. Marcelo laughed on the other end of the line. Mr. Roberto, can I tell you something? When I arrived in Brasília 15 years ago, I had exactly the same fears. I came from an even smaller town than yours, in the interior of Bahia. Do you know what my father told me the day I left? What? He said, son, God didn't give you this fear to paralyze you. He gave you this fear to remind you that you need him. And then he read a verse I never forgot. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Roberto almost dropped the phone. It was the same verse Claudia had read the week before. Doctor, can you repeat that? Joshua 1 verse 9. Mr. Roberto, this verse changed my life. Joshua was terrified because he had to take on a responsibility that was bigger than him. But God didn't say don't be afraid. He said be strong and courageous even with fear because I am with you. Roberto closed his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he felt a strange peace taking over him. Doctor, can I ask a question? Of course. Why are you so sure I can do this? Dr. Marcelo was silent for a few seconds before answering. Mr. Roberto, can I tell you something personal? 3 weeks ago, I was praying about whom to call for this position. I was asking God to show me someone with integrity, capable, but mainly someone who depended on him. The next day, I arrived at the office and found a report about your work in São Pedro do Araguaia on my desk. A report that no one can explain how it got there. Roberto felt a shiver. Mr. Roberto, I believe you're not being invited by me. You're being sent by God. When Roberto hung up the phone, he knew his life had changed forever. Not because he had made a decision, he hadn't yet, but because he had understood something fundamental. The fear he felt wasn't a sign to retreat. It was a sign that the journey ahead was too big for him to walk alone. And maybe that was exactly what God wanted. That afternoon, Roberto did something he hadn't done in years. He closed the office early, went home, gathered the family in the living room, and said, everyone, we need to talk, and we need to pray. Marina smiled. Dad, you've already decided, haven't you? Actually, daughter, I decided to let God decide, but in a different way than I always did. What do you mean? Asked Claudia. Whenever I had to make a difficult decision, I prayed asking God to show me the safest path. This time, I'm going to pray asking him to give me courage to follow the path he has already prepared. João Pedro raised his hand as if he were in school. Dad, does this mean we're going to Brasília? Roberto looked at his son, then at Marina, then at Claudia. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel fear when he thought about the future. He felt something different. Expectation. João Pedro. This means we're going to discover together what happens when we stop asking, what if it goes wrong? And start asking, what if God is right? That night, Roberto took the Bible and reread Joshua 1 verse 9. But this time, something different caught his attention. The verse wasn't just a promise. It was a command. Be strong and courageous. It wasn't a request. It was a command. God wasn't suggesting courage. He was ordering it. And for the first time, Roberto understood why. On the following Sunday, during service, Pastor Alcides had preached about Joshua 1 verse 9. Church, said the pastor, his 72 years weighing in his tired but still firm voice. How many times does God prepare us for something big and we keep looking back, missing our comfort zone? Joshua had every reason in the world to be afraid. But look what God says, have I not commanded you? In other words, wasn't it me who prepared you for this moment? Roberto felt as if he were alone in the temple, as if every word were directed specifically at him. Brothers, sometimes God doesn't deliver us from the valley. He walks with us through the valley. And sometimes He doesn't deliver us from the giant. He enables us to face the giant. After service, Roberto approached the pastor and told him everything. The proposal, the fear, the prayers, Dr. Marcelo's call, the verse repeating in his life. Pastor Alcides listened in silence, nodding occasionally. When Roberto finished, the pastor was thoughtful for a few moments. Roberto, can I tell you a story? Of course, Pastor. In 1987, I was pastor of a church of 30 members in an even smaller town than this one. One day, I received an invitation to pastor a church of 500 members in Goiás. I was terrified. I spent 3 months praying, asking for a sign from God. Roberto waited. Do you know what sign God gave me? What? None. Pastor Alcides smiled. Absolutely none. No door opened miraculously. No verse jumped off the page. No voice from heaven. Do you know what I learned? What? That sometimes God doesn't give signs because He has already given all the tools we need to decide. Character, wisdom, discernment, and the promise that He will be with us regardless of the choice. And did you go? No, Pastor Alcides laughed. And it was the most correct decision of my life. Because I discovered it wasn't about the size of the church or the salary. It was about where God could best use who I was. And who I was worked better here. Roberto was confused. Pastor, so are you telling me not to go? No, Roberto. I'm saying you already know the answer. You're just afraid to admit it. On Monday, at 2:30 p.m., when Roberto was about to call Dr. Marcelo to give his final answer, his cell phone rang. It was him. Mr. Roberto, we need to meet in person. Today, I can be there at 7 p.m. The situation here is worse than we imagined. Much worse. At 7:15 p.m., Dr. Marcelo parked a silver Corolla in front of Roberto's office. Middle-aged man, graying hair, wrinkled suit of someone who had driven 4 hours nonstop. Mr. Roberto, sorry to show up like this, but I couldn't talk about this over the phone. They sat in the small meeting room of the office. Mr. Roberto, do you remember I mentioned a corruption scheme of 50 million Brazilian reals? Yes, it was 320 million Brazilian reals. And it involves very powerful people. Senator, deputies, heavyweight businessmen. Dr. Marcelo paused. Mr. Roberto, if you accept this position, you won't just be a regional director. You'll be the man responsible for rebuilding the credibility of an institution that's on the verge of collapse. Roberto felt his blood freeze. Doctor, I don't know if... Mr. Roberto, can I be brutally honest with you? Roberto nodded. I offer this position to you not despite your inexperience, but because of it. I need someone who doesn't have vices, doesn't have political commitments, doesn't owe favors to anyone. I need someone who gets there and simply does the right thing. Dr. Marcelo leaned forward. But I need you to understand, this won't be easy. There will be political pressure, threats, bribery attempts, people trying to destroy your reputation. They'll try to break you in every way possible. Roberto remained silent for a few moments. Doctor, can I ask a question? Of course. Why are you telling me this? If you want me to accept, why are you scaring me? Dr. Marcelo smiled for the first time since he arrived. Because, Mr. Roberto, I don't want you to accept out of naivety. I want you to accept knowing exactly what you're getting into. I want you to accept because you believe you can make a difference, not because you think it will be easy. Roberto arrived home at 9:30 p.m., mentally exhausted. He found a family gathered in the living room, clearly waiting for him. How was it, honey? Asked Claudia. Roberto sat heavily on the sofa and told everything. The true dimension of the scandal, the pressure he would face, the risks involved. Dad, said Marina when he finished, can I say something? Of course, daughter. Dad, since I was little I hear you say that God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. But now that He's calling you to something extraordinary, are you afraid of being too ordinary? Marina's observation hit Roberto like a punch in the stomach. Marina, it's not quite like that. Dad, João Pedro interrupted. Do you remember the story of David and Goliath that you always tell us? Of course. David didn't defeat Goliath because he was strong. He won because he trusted that God was strong. Dad, This Goliath of yours is no different. Claudia held Roberto's hand. Honey, can I tell you something I've never said? Roberto looked at her. 18 years ago, I married a man who dreamed of making a difference in the world. In recent years, I've seen this man settle into a tiny, safe, predictable life. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I miss the man who dreamed big. Roberto felt his eyes well up. Claudia, you don't understand. If I accept this and fail... Roberto, she interrupted, using his full name as she only did in serious moments. What if you accept, and it's exactly what God planned for your life? That night, Roberto couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., he got up and went to the backyard. The sky was clear, full of stars. God, he said aloud, I need an answer. Not a sign, not a miracle. A clear answer. He stayed silent for a few minutes, just looking at the stars. Lord, I'm afraid. Very afraid. Afraid I can't handle it. Afraid of disappointing. Afraid of discovering I'm not who I thought I was. The wind swayed the surrounding trees. But I'm also afraid of something else. Afraid of reaching 60 and asking myself, what if? What if God was preparing me for something big, and I chose to stay small out of fear? Roberto opened the Bible he had brought with him, and, even in the dark, found Joshua 1 verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. He read the verse 3 times. On the third time, something caught his attention, something he had never noticed before. Have I not commanded you? It was a rhetorical question. God wasn't asking if he had commanded. He was affirming that he had commanded. It was as if God were saying, Joshua, do you think this opportunity appeared by chance? Do you think it was a coincidence that I prepared you exactly for this moment? Roberto closed his eyes and, for the first time in weeks, felt complete peace. Lord, he whispered, it wasn't a coincidence that I discovered my gift with numbers exactly when CONAB needed someone with integrity in numbers. It wasn't a coincidence that Dr. Marcelo is a man of faith looking for another man of faith. It wasn't a coincidence that the pastor preached about Joshua exactly when I needed to hear about Joshua. A tear ran down his face. Lord, I accept, not because I'm not afraid, but because I trust that you are with me. And if you are with me, who could be against me? On Tuesday, at 8 a.m., Roberto called Dr. Marcelo. Doctor, good morning. This is Roberto Mendes. Mr. Roberto, good morning. Have you made your decision? I have, doctor. I accept. Silence on the other end of the line. Mr. Roberto, are you sure? Last night, I didn't paint a very encouraging picture. Doctor, can I tell you something? I've spent my whole life believing that God enables me for what he calls me to. It's time to prove if I really believe that. Dr. Marcelo laughed. Mr. Roberto, when can you start? Whenever you need, doctor. Monday. Roberto took a deep breath. Monday. The following Sunday, Roberto was officially dismissed from his deacon duties at the church. Pastor Alcides insisted it be a special ceremony. Church, said the pastor, today we say goodbye to Brother Roberto, who is being sent by God on a mission to Brasília. The word sent echoed in the small temple. Brothers, Roberto is not leaving God's work. He's taking God's work to where it needs to be. Sometimes God calls us to preach from the pulpit. Sometimes he calls us to preach in the corridors of power. Dona Irasi, 84 years old, the oldest person in the church, stood up with difficulty. Roberto, my son, can I pray for you? Roberto knelt in front of the small lady. Lord Jesus, said Dona Irasi with a trembling but firm voice, you are sending our Roberto to a land full of giants. But Lord, David was also sent to face giants, and you were with David. She placed her trembling hands on Roberto's head. Lord, may Roberto always remember where he came from. May he always remember in whom he trusts. And may he always remember he's not alone. Not a single person was standing in that small temple. Everyone was crying. Roberto, continued Dona Irasi, you will discover that Brasília is not just a place. It's a spiritual battlefield. But remember, the battle is not yours. The battle is the Lord's. Monday, 7 a.m. Roberto was in the parking lot of the CONAB building in Brasília in the driver's seat of his 2010 Civic, looking at the 15-story glass building that would be his new world. His cell phone rang. It was Claudia. "Honey, how are you?" Terrified, Roberto laughed, but at peace. "Roberto, do you remember what you told me in our first married fight?" Roberto smiled. Of course he remembered. That God didn't give me you to face life alone. Exactly. And God didn't give you this opportunity to face it alone either. Roberto hung up the phone, took his briefcase, the same one he had used for 15 years, and walked toward the building. In the elevator, while going up to the 12th floor, he whispered once more, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." The elevator doors opened. Roberto Mendes from São Pedro do Araguaia, Goiás, stepped into the hallway that would change not only his life, but potentially the destiny of millions of Brazilians who depended on CONAB programs. He didn't know yet, but in the next 5 years, he would discover that sometimes God doesn't prepare us for what we want to do. Sometimes he prepares us for what needs to be done. 5 years later, Roberto was sitting in his office on the 12th floor, looking out the window at the view of Brasília that had become familiar. On his desk, a pile of thank you letters from small rural producers who had benefited from the programs he had restructured. On the wall, a photo of the family on Marina's medical school graduation day, paid for with a salary he never imagined having. His cell phone rang. It was Dr. Marcelo, now Minister of Agriculture. "Roberto, I need to talk to you. The president wants to meet you. He's considering nominating you for the general directorship of CONAB." Roberto smiled, remembering the terrified man who had stepped into that building 5 years ago. "Doctor, can I tell you something? I'm not afraid anymore." No. I discovered that when you walk with God, there's no giant too big or valley too dark. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Joshua 1 verse 9. Sometimes the fear we feel is not a sign to retreat, but evidence that we are about to enter something too big to face alone. And that's exactly where we discover we were never really alone. Roberto learned that God doesn't enable us to live a small, safe life. He enables us to live a life that makes a difference in his kingdom. And sometimes, making a difference means leaving the comfort zone and trusting that the one who calls us also enables us. What calling are you resisting out of fear? What door has God opened that you're afraid to walk through? Remember, it's not about your capacity. It's about the faithfulness of the one who promised to be with you wherever you go. So did this story move you too? Look, if you know someone who's going through a difficult situation like this, send this video to that person. Sometimes it's exactly what they need to hear today. And go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way you'll always know about new stories. Tell me in the comments, what part moved you the most? I read all the comments and love knowing how these stories touch you. Until the next video, everyone, and don't forget this, do your best today